My husband made our daughter call him uncle, so his first love would never know we existed. Our daughter gave him 100 forgiveness coupons, and he told her to tear one up whenever he chose another little girl over her. On her 6th birthday, only 3 remained. The fireworks she thought were for her spelled out someone else's name. Alexander seemed to notice that I no longer tried to stop him. Whenever he made excuses to accompany Charlotte, Clark, and her daughter, even our daughter, Kimberly Morrison, no longer cried or threw tantrums. The moment he stepped toward the door, our daughter picked up a forgiveness coupon and asked him carefully, "Uncle Alex, can you not go see them today and stay home with Mom and me instead?" Alexander didn't stop walking. His voice drifted back from the doorway, carrying a hint of approach and urgency. "Kimmy, be good. Pearl is sick and I need to take care of her. You still have so many coupons left anyway. Just tear this one up. It doesn't matter. Remember to forgive me after you use it." Kimmy's eyes turned red as she tore the coupon in her hands into pieces and threw it in the trash. Looking at the table with only 2 forgiveness coupons remaining, I knew the day we would leave wasn't far away. After Alexander left, Kimmy stared at the door for a long time, her light brown eyes filled with hurt tears. But she refused to let a single drop fall. I walked over and hugged her, wanting to take her back to the living room. But Kimmy grabbed the corner of my shirt and looked up at me with a tearful voice, asking, "Mom, why doesn't Uncle Alex like me? Am I not a good girl?" Her words and the sadness in her voice made my nose sting, and I almost cried too. I ruffled her soft hair and said, "Kimmy, you're my most well-behaved treasure. Uncle Alex doesn't dislike you either. It's just that someone's sick and Uncle Alex went to help them." Kimmy nodded and didn't ask any more questions. I knew she hadn't accepted this answer, but rather that she didn't want me to be sad too. I carried her to the dining table and brought out the cake we had baked together that morning to celebrate her 6th birthday. After lighting the candles, Kimmy was about to make a wish when the sound of fireworks suddenly came from outside the window. Then Alexander's voice rang out from the large screen by the river. He stood in the center of the screen, his expression gentle as he said, "Today is a special little girl's birthday. I want to wish her a happy birthday here tonight. All the fireworks in the city are set off for her." Hearing Alexander's words, Kimmy's eyes, which had been fixed on the big screen, immediately lit up with her face full of excitement. She hugged my leg and said with a laugh, "Mom, Uncle Alex still remembers my birthday. Didn't forget." I smiled and touched her hair. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement as she held a green piece of paper and said, "Mom, for my wish this year, I want to give today's forgiveness coupon back to Uncle Alex. He went to help someone, but he still remembered my birthday. I shouldn't have torn up the coupon." The fireworks went off precisely at the stroke of midnight, but the words spelled out by those fireworks pierced both mine and Kimmy's eyes like daggers. "Dearest Pearl, happy 5th birthday. Love from Daddy, Alexander." In the thundering sounds of fireworks, Kimmy threw away the forgiveness coupon in her hand and tossed the remaining 2 coupons into the trash can. "I never want to forgive Uncle Alex again." She said this and ran back to her room. When I went to her room, she had already curled up on her little bed and fallen asleep. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, and she clutched a photo of our family at the amusement park tightly in her arms. Kimmy treasured this photo and would take it out to look at from time to time. It was the only picture we had of our family of 3 at an amusement park after Alexander bought the entire amusement park as a birthday gift for Pearl because she said she liked it. Kimmy never mentioned wanting to go to an amusement park again. I put the photo away for her, wiped the tears from her face, and let her rest. Next morning, I contacted a divorce lawyer and asked her to help me draft a divorce agreement. However, after I finished the phone call, Kimmy peeked her head out from behind the door. I waved her over, and she immediately walked in and hugged my legs. Fighting back the bitterness in my heart, I asked her, "Sweetheart, if Mom divorces Uncle Alex, would you rather stay with Uncle Alex or come with Mom?" Kimmy's arms around me stiffened. She lowered her head, her voice carrying tears and reluctance. "Do we really have to leave, Mom? Uncle Alex promised that once I turn 7, he'll let me call him Dad. Can we wait a little longer? Can we give him one more chance?" Kimmy's words made my chest tighten, and I almost started crying. During our years of marriage, Alexander had refused to make our relationship public to avoid Charlotte's misunderstanding. But even worse, our daughter wasn't allowed to call him Dad from the day she was born. I remembered one time when Kimmy gathered courage to call him Dad. He flew into a rage right there and made her kneel at the front door, forcing her to shout, Uncle Alex 3,000 times until her voice was nearly gone. Since then, whether at home or outside, Kimmy never dared call him Dad again. Only Uncle Alex. After saying this, she picked up the forgiveness coupons she had thrown in the trash yesterday and said, "Mom, look, there's still one coupon left. Let's give him one more chance." Kimmy's eyes, red and swollen from crying, were full of determination. I ruffled her hair and sighed, agreeing to her request. Alexander hadn't come home since that day. Kimmy brought me an invitation, her eyes hopeful as she said, "Mom, the teacher said both parents need to attend the parent-teacher conference at school. Can you and Uncle Alex come together? I promised my classmates they could meet my dad." I held the invitation with some doubt, looking at the expectation in Kimmy's eyes. I couldn't bear to disappoint her, but I wasn't sure if Alexander would actually go. After all, in our 5 years of marriage, he had never attended any of Kimmy's parent-teacher conferences. For promising Kimmy, I called Alexander to confirm. However, a young voice answered the phone. "Hello? Are you looking for Daddy? Alexander? He's taking a shower and will be out soon." My nails dug into my palm to keep from lashing out. I coldly hung up the phone. Just as I was about to tell Kimmy that Alexander couldn't make it, he called back. "Isabella, girl's young and can't tell the difference between Uncle Alex and Daddy, so she called me. The wrong thing. Just don't misunderstand. Kimmy's my only precious daughter." He sounded rather pathetic trying to explain himself. In such a panic, I no longer wanted to pursue these matters. Fidgeting with the last remaining forgiveness coupon in my hand, I asked him coldly, "Are you coming to Kimmy's parent-teacher conference?" Alexander was about to speak, but I cut him off. "You've already missed her birthday. Are you going to miss her parent-teacher conference too?" Alexander paused, and after a long while he said, "I'll go. I'll definitely go this time." "Is Kimmy mad at me? Can you help me explain?" I had no interest in his long explanations. After getting a definite answer, I ended the call. Kimmy, who was beside me, saw me nod and jumped up happily. Even though there were still several days until the parent-teacher conference, she had already started preparing what clothes she would wear. On the day of the parent-teacher conference, Kimmy got up early and asked me to braid her hair nicely. He also put on her favorite outfit. Her eyes were bright and sparkling, and she was full of smiles. Looking at her, so full of anticipation, I felt a knot of anxiety forming in my chest. I took out my phone and texted Alexander. "Alexander, don't forget. You promised to attend Kimmy's parent-teacher conference today soon." Alexander sent back a voice message. "You and Kimmy, go ahead. I'll be there soon." In the background, I could hear Pearl calling Alexander Daddy, and Charlotte Mommy. Sure enough, he was once again deceiving us. For Charlotte and her daughter, all that talk about working overtime at the company was just an excuse to spend time with those two. If this were before, I would have definitely fought with him and made a scene. But now I only reminded him coldly, "If you disappoint Kimmy again, this time she won't forgive you anymore." After saying that, I drove with my daughter to her school without waiting for his reply. The parent-teacher conference was about to start, but Alexander still hadn't arrived. Kimmy kept looking toward the door, hoping her dad would walk through at any second. Watching Kimmy stare at the door like that, I texted Alexander to urge him to come quickly. He told me there was a sudden emergency at the company, and that he couldn't attend the conference. I frowned, trying to figure out how to explain this to Kimmy without hurting her. When I saw her looking toward the classroom door, her face had turned deathly pale. Following her gaze, I saw Alexander, who had said he was too busy to come to the parent-teacher conference, striding into the classroom, initially thinking he was planning to surprise Kimmy. My furrowed brow relaxed. I was about to wave him over, when I saw Charlotte tightly holding his arm beside him, while he held Charlotte's daughter, Pearl, closely in his arms. The three of them looked like an intimate family. My raised arms suddenly stiffened and dropped. Alexander didn't see me and Kimmy. He sat down naturally with Pearl in his arms, and Charlotte beside him in the seats meant for Pearl's parents. I quickly looked at my daughter, and she was keeping her head down tightly. And on the previously dry desk there was now a small puddle of water. I put my arm around her, about to comfort her, when several little boys suddenly appeared beside her. They surrounded Kimmy and said, "Kimberly Morrison, didn't you say you'd bring your dad today? Where's your dad? I think you were just lying. So you're just a bastard with no father. Kimberly, you're such a liar." Kimmy kept her head down, her ears turning bright red. She suddenly lifted her head, revealing a pair of red swollen eyes, and shouted, "I do have a dad. You're the bastard with no dad." After saying this, Kimmy pointed her finger forcefully toward Alexander and shouted with all her might, "Uncle Alex, over there is my dad." Kimmy's words caused an instant uproar in the classroom. The other parents' eyes kept darting between me, Charlotte, and Alexander. The classroom was suddenly filled with all kinds of ridiculous speculations. Seeing Kimmy's and Alexander's strikingly similar faces, everyone began to guess that Charlotte and Pearl were the mistress and illegitimate daughter. And today I caught them red-handed. As the discussions grew louder and louder, Pearl immediately began to tear up and said, "This is my daddy, not yours. Kimberly, it's bad enough that you bully me at school every day, but this is my daddy, not yours." I was about to speak when Kimmy grabbed tightly onto the corner of my shirt. As her mother, I knew that she didn't want me to speak. Her tear-filled eyes stared intently at Alexander. However, at that moment, Alexander stood unhesitatingly on Pearl's side, acting as if he had never known Kimmy. His voice was stern and reproachful. "Whose child are you? How can you bully other kids? Come over here and apologize to Pearl." With these words, he immediately distanced himself from Kimmy and me. He also completely cleared Charlotte and Pearl of the accusations of being a mistress and an illegitimate daughter. Hearing Alexander's words, I was instantly furious and wanted to confront him. However, Kimmy suddenly spoke up, her voice tearful and small. "I'm sorry, Uncle Alex." Then she threw herself into my arms and said, "Mom, I want to go home. Can you take me home?" Kimmy's condition made me unable to care about anything else. I held her and left that place that made her so uncomfortable. On the way back, Kimmy threw the last forgiveness coupon out the car window. That green forgiveness coupon was swept up by the wind and disappeared completely. That night, I packed all of my belongings and Kimmy's. I then destroyed what we couldn't take until every last trace of us had completely vanished from that house. I placed the divorce papers and the now empty forgiveness coupon box on the living room table. Then, taking Kimmy's hand, I boarded a flight abroad. The hum of the aircraft engines vibrated through the floorboards, a low, relentless drone that felt like the only steady thing left in the world. Outside the oval window, the runway lights blurred into streaks of amber and gold before sinking beneath a thick blanket of clouds. The city where I had spent 7 years shrinking myself into the shadows dissolved into the night sky. Kimmy sat beside me, her small legs sticking straight out over the edge of the seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't asked where we were going. She hadn't asked for her teddy bear or her storybooks. When the flight attendant came by with a warm towel and a juice cup, Kimmy looked up, offered a polite, faint smile, and whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." There were no tears on her face. That was what broke my heart the most. A child who throws a tantrum still believes that crying can change an adult's mind. A child who sits in silence has already accepted that her pain is invisible. I reached over and unbuckled my seatbelt slightly to gather her into my arms. She leaned her forehead against my collarbone, her breath warm and shallow against my neck. "Mom," she murmured, her voice barely louder than the cabin air vent. "I'm here, baby. Is Uncle Alex going to come to our new house?" My chest seized. I stroked her fine, soft hair, untangling the braid that had come loose during our hurried departure.
"No, sweetheart.
Uncle Alex will stay in his house, and we will live in ours." Kimmy went still for a long time. Then, she pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. Her hazel eyes, so strikingly shaped like Alexander's yet devoid of his cold calculation, held an eerie clarity. "That's okay," she said quietly. "He doesn't have any coupons left anyway." She turned back toward the window, watching the sea of blackness outside, and closed her eyes. Within 10 minutes, her breathing slowed into sleep. I stayed awake for the entire 14-hour journey across the ocean. In the dim overhead light, I took out my phone, removed the SIM card, snapped it in half between my thumb and forefinger, and dropped the broken pieces into the sick bag in the seat pocket. For 5 years, my world had orbited Alexander Morrison. When I married him, he told me that his family's business was in a precarious merger and that his public image needed to remain entirely unattached. Later, when Charlotte Clark returned from abroad with a daughter born out of wedlock, his excuse shifted. Charlotte had severe postpartum depression, her heart was weak, and any sudden shock, such as discovering that her former college sweetheart was married with a child, might push her over the edge. "Just give her some time, Isabella," he had pleaded with me in our bedroom years ago, holding my hands with what I foolishly believed was sincerity. "Once Charlotte's condition stabilizes and she finds her footing, I will announce our marriage to the entire world. Kimmy is my flesh and blood. Do you think I don't love her?" I had believed him. I allowed him to hide our marriage license in the back of a locked safe. I allowed him to introduce me to his colleagues as an old family acquaintance. And worst of all, I had stood by when he forced our 3-year-old daughter to practice saying Uncle Alex in the mirror, threatening to withhold his visits if she ever slipped up in public. The 100 forgiveness coupons had been Alexander's idea of a clever parenting tool. When Kimmy turned 4 and cried because Alexander canceled her zoo trip to take Pearl to the hospital for a mild fever, Alexander had brought home a stack of custom-printed green tickets. Kimmy, he had said with a chuckle, patting her cheek. Daddy is very busy. Whenever Daddy makes a mistake, you tear up 1 coupon. You have 100 chances to forgive Daddy. That means Daddy has 100 chances to make it up to you. He had treated a child's unconditional love as an inexhaustible bank account, drawing from it day after day, convinced the balance would never hit 0. He never imagined that a 6-year-old could count. Back in the city we left behind, dawn was breaking over Alexander's luxury villa in the Western District. I know what happened next not because I was there but because my attorney, Rachel Vance, recounted the timeline with clinical precision when she finalized the domestic filings weeks later. Alexander had stayed at the hospital until 4 in the morning. Pearl had developed an earache after the parent-teacher conference, an earache Charlotte tearfully insisted was brought on by the stress of the classroom confrontation. Alexander had comforted Charlotte, held Pearl until she fell asleep in the VIP suite, and then had his chauffeur drive him home to change before his morning executive meeting. In his mind, the incident at the school was just another minor domestic squabble. He expected to walk through the front door, find Isabella in the kitchen making breakfast, and hear Kimmy running down the hallway in her socks. He had even instructed his assistant to buy a limited-edition Barbie dream house from the downtown boutique, intending to leave it in the foyer as an effortless peace offering. When he unlocked the front door at 6:30, the house was plunged in utter darkness. Isabella, he called out, loosening his silk tie as he stepped into the foyer. Kimmy? No one answered. There was no smell of freshly brewed coffee, no sound of morning cartoons from the living room television. Alexander frowned. He turned on the chandelier. The living room looked pristine, so pristine that it felt unnatural. On the dining table, where Kimmy usually kept her colored pencils and sketchbooks, there was nothing except a thick manila envelope and a small, crystal jar. He walked over, his leather shoes clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. He picked up the envelope first. Inside was a complete, signed divorce settlement. I had signed every page with a steady hand. I had waived all rights to his family trust, his company shares, his luxury real estate, and the spousal support payments he would normally be required to provide. I demanded only 2 things: sole, unencumbered physical and legal custody of Kimberly Morrison, and that he never step foot within 5 miles of her. Beside the envelope, the crystal jar sat empty. Alexander's eyes fell to the bottom of the glass. There was no green paper left inside. On the wooden surface beside it lay the jagged scraps of the 99th coupon, torn and tossed away after the midnight fireworks. The final coupon was nowhere to be found. Alexander's initial reaction was not panic, it was irritation. He pulled out his phone and dialed my number. The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service. He scoffed, assuming I had blocked him. He called the home landline. The line was dead. He dialed my mother's old estate manager. The call went straight to an automated legal answering service. Childish, Alexander muttered under his breath, tossing his phone onto the table. Making a scene over a child's argument at school. He walked up the stairs toward the master bedroom, intending to take a shower. He pushed the bedroom door open and stopped dead in his tracks. The room had been hollowed out. The closet doors hung open. The left side, which held his bespoke suits and cashmere coats, remained immaculate. The right side, where my dresses, shoes, and coats had hung for 5 years, was entirely bare. Not a single hanger was left on the rail. He spun around and rushed down the hall to Kimmy's bedroom. The pastel pink room was completely stripped. Her bed had no sheets, only a bare mattress. Her bookshelf, once packed with fairy tales and drawing pads, was empty. The toy chest was open and vacant. The wall where she had proudly taped her kindergarten finger paintings had been cleared. Even the adhesive putty had been meticulously scraped off the paint. The only thing remaining in the entire room was a small white trash bin near the door. Alexander stepped inside, his heart beginning an erratic, unfamiliar thud against his ribs. He looked down into the bin. Inside were the framed family photos he had once allowed us to take in private. In every single photograph, the image of Kimmy and me had been neatly cut out with scissors, leaving only Alexander's solitary figure sitting against backdrops of beaches, gardens, and birthday tables. Next to the cutout photos lay Kimmy's favorite drawing, a picture of a little girl holding a tall man's hand under a sun. At the top, the words Daddy and Kimmy had been heavily scribbled out with a black marker. Beneath the thick black scratches, written in shaky, 6-year-old print, were 3 words. Nobody's Uncle Alex. Alexander's fingers trembled as he pulled the paper from the bin. The paper felt heavy, like a lead weight pressing into his palm. A sudden, cold dread, sharp and suffocating, crept from the base of his spine up to his throat. He pulled out his phone again and dialed his head of corporate security. "Find Isabella," Alexander ordered, his voice cracking through the quiet house. "Find where she took my daughter. Check every hotel in the city. Check the train stations. Check the airports.
Now."
For the first 48 hours, Alexander genuinely believed he would have us back by dinner. He was Alexander Morrison, the managing director of Morrison Holdings, a man whose family held significant sway over the city's commerce, shipping, and real estate. In his mind, a woman who had stayed home for 6 years without a formal corporate career could not possibly vanish off the grid. He sent teams of private investigators to every luxury hotel, every rental agency, and every property under my maiden name. He had security personnel monitor my old bank accounts, waiting for a credit card swipe at a grocery store or an ATM withdrawal. Nothing happened. On the 3rd day, Rachel Vance walked into Alexander's executive office on the 72nd floor of the Morrison Tower. She did not come alone. She was flanked by 2 senior partners from the city's most formidable civil litigation firm. Alexander didn't even let her sit down. He stood behind his vast mahogany desk, his shirt sleeves rolled up, dark circles under his bloodshot eyes. "Where are they, Rachel?" Alexander demanded, slamming his palms onto the desk. "I know Isabella went to you. Tell her this farce has gone far enough. I'm willing to overlook the divorce papers. I'll buy the house next to the prep school. I'll let Kimmy call me whatever she wants. Just tell Isabella to bring my daughter home." Rachel Vance did not flinch. She placed a sleek black leather folder on the desk and opened it with measured calmness. "Mr. Morrison," Rachel said, her voice dropping the room's temperature by several degrees. "I am not here to negotiate your marital grievances. I am here to deliver the formal notice of absolute surrender of assets, the executed divorce decree filed through the High Court under mutual abandonment clauses, and a certified copy of Kimberly Morrison's legal name change and emancipation from your paternal registry." Alexander froze. "What did you just say?" "Isabella has legally dissolved your marriage," Rachel stated clearly. "Under the prenuptial terms you insisted on drafting 6 years ago to protect your assets from Charlotte Clark's knowledge, Isabella had the unilateral right to dissolve the union without financial claim if you failed to cohabit for more than 180 days out of a calendar year. We have documented your domestic absences over the last 3 years. You spent precisely 214 nights at the Clark residence or accompanying Miss Clark on private travel." Alexander's face drained of color. That was charitable assistance. Charlotte was ill." "The law does not distinguish between charity and neglect, Mr. Morrison," Rachel replied coolly. "Furthermore, Isabella did not leave with your money. She didn't need it." "What are you talking about?" Rachel allowed herself a small, cutting smile. "You spent 5 years believing Isabella was an unemployed, dependent housewife who had nowhere else to go. You forgot that before she married you, she was the sole heiress to the Linwood Architectural Heritage Trust. The moment she turned 30 last month, the offshore trust matured. She liquidated her domestic holdings through an international private firm 3 weeks ago. She didn't buy a plane ticket with your credit cards. She chartered private transport." Alexander stumbled back against his leather chair, the breath knocked out of him. She planned this?" "No," Rachel said, her tone suddenly hardening with raw, human contempt. "She endured it. She gave you 99 chances to remember you were a father. She waited until your daughter had nothing left inside her heart before she walked away." Rachel reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small, flat wooden box. She placed it squarely on top of the legal papers. "Kimberly asked me to return this to you." Alexander looked down. His hands shook as he lifted the polished wooden lid. Inside the box were dozens of tiny, torn green fragments, the remnants of every coupon Kimmy had ripped up over the past 2 years. There was the scrap from her 5th birthday, when Alexander left after 10 minutes to bring Pearl cough medicine. There was the scrap from Christmas Eve, when Alexander promised to dress up as Santa but spent the night at Charlotte's tree lighting party. There was the scrap from Kimmy's ballet recital, where she danced alone on stage while staring at the empty seat in the front row. And on the very top of the pile lay the final, intact green coupon that Kimmy had thrown out the car window, retrieved from the pavement by my attorney before we headed to the airfield. Across the back of the green paper, in Kimmy's neat, careful handwriting, was a single sentence. "Uncle Alex, you don't have to pretend anymore." Alexander stared at the handwriting. His chest heaved. A sharp, violent pain tore through his sternum, so intense that he had to brace himself against the edge of the mahogany desk to keep from collapsing. "Where's she?" he choked out, his voice cracking into a ragged whisper. "Rachel, please. Just let me talk to Kimmy. Let me hear her voice. I'll give up everything. I'll make a public announcement today. I'll hold a press conference. I'll tell the whole world Kimberly is my only daughter." "It's too late, Mr. Morrison," Rachel said, closing her briefcase with a sharp, final click. "When she called you her father in front of that entire classroom, you asked whose child she was and told her to apologize to someone else's daughter. You publicly disowned her." Rachel looked at him with cold pity. As far as Kimberly is concerned, her father died in that classroom. 7,000 miles away, the autumn rain in Edinburgh fell gently against the stone facade of a Georgian townhouse overlooking the Dean village. The air here was crisp, carrying the scent of wet pine, ancient stone, and wood smoke. We had settled into a quiet neighborhood where the streets were paved with cobblestones and the sound of church bells drifted over the valley every morning at 8. In the first 2 months, Kimmy had night terrors. She would wake up suddenly in the middle of the night, sitting bolt upright in her canopy bed, her hands clutching the duvet. She wouldn't cry out. She would simply check the door, looking to see if someone was going to force her to kneel on the floor or scold her for speaking too loudly. Every single time, I would be there within seconds. I would lift her small body into my arms, sit in the rocking chair by the bay window, and wrap her in a thick wool blanket. "You're safe, Kimmy," I would whisper into her hair, rocking her back and forth as the rain tapped against the glass. "You don't have to be quiet here. You can laugh as loud as you want. You can cry as loud as you want. This is our home." Gradually, the tension in her small frame began to melt away. In the spring, I enrolled her in a local primary school at the edge of the park. On her first day, I stood by the iron gates, my stomach tied in knots, terrified that the other children might tease her or that she would withdraw into her shell. When the bell rang at 3 in the afternoon, I saw her walking out across the courtyard. She was holding hands with a red-haired girl in yellow rain boots, both of them giggling uncontrollably as they jumped over puddles. When Kimmy spotted me standing by the gate, her entire face lit up with a brilliant, unshadowed radiance I hadn't seen since she was 3 years old. "Mom," she shouted, her voice ringing clear across the lawn. She let go of her friend's hand and sprinted toward me, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She threw her arms around my waist, burying her face in my coat with pure, uninhibited joy.
Mom, look.
She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and held it up with 2 hands. It was a watercolor painting of a stone house with a massive oak tree in the garden. Beneath the tree were 2 figures, a woman in a blue dress holding a little girl's hand, both of them wearing wide, crooked smiles under a bright yellow sun. In the top corner, written in bold, proud purple paint, were the words, "Our real family." I knelt down on the wet pavement, pulled her into my arms, and buried my face in the crook of her neck, letting my tears soak quietly into her wool scarf. For the first time in 6 years, neither of us felt afraid. Act V. The House of Cards. While our life in Scotland took root in peace, the world Alexander had built on lies began to collapse under its own weight. Without Isabella's quiet labor running his household, managing his personal affairs, and shielding his domestic neglect from the public, Alexander's life became a chaotic downward spiral. The school incident had not remained a secret. A parent who witnessed the confrontation in the classroom had recorded the exchange where Alexander publicly denied his own biological daughter to protect Charlotte Clark. Within weeks, the video leaked onto local social media networks. The backlash was catastrophic. The high society circles that Alexander had worked so hard to impress viewed his behavior not merely as an indiscretion, but as an act of grotesque moral cowardice. Long-standing corporate partners who valued family legacy and public stability began quietly pulling their investments from Morrison Holdings. Worse still, Charlotte Clark's facade began to splinter. Seeing that Isabella was gone and Alexander was spiraling, Charlotte assumed her lifelong ambition of becoming the matriarch of the Morrison estate was finally within reach. She moved her belongings into Alexander's villa without his permission, replaced Isabella's remaining kitchenware, and began demanding that Alexander sign over a 20% equity share of his retail subsidiary to Pearl's trust fund. One evening, Alexander returned to the villa after a 16-hour day of disastrous board meetings, his body reeking of scotch and exhaustion. He found Charlotte sitting in the dining room, drinking wine while looking at bridal catalogs. Pearl was running through the hallway, throwing her plastic toys against the walls and screaming at the housekeeper. "Alexander, darling," Charlotte purred, walking over to wrap her arms around his neck. "The decorator came by today. I think we should paint Kimberly's old room in lavender. Pearl needs a larger walk-in closet for her pageant gowns anyway." Alexander stood rigid. He looked at Charlotte, at the flawless makeup, the calculating gaze, the complete absence of warmth, and for the first time in his life, the scales fell from his eyes. "Get out," Alexander said. Charlotte paused, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "What did you say?" "I said, get your things, take your daughter, and get out of my house." "Alexander, have you lost your mind?" Charlotte's voice pitched high, the sweet innocence vanishing instantly into venomous rage. "I gave up my youth for you. Pearl calls you daddy. You promised you would take care of us." "Pearl is not my daughter," Alexander said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "I took a paternity test 3 days ago, Charlotte." Charlotte's face froze in sheer terror. Alexander pulled a folded medical report from his inner suit pocket and threw it in her face. The pages scattered across the hardwood floor. "You knew all along," Alexander said, his voice shaking with a rage so profound it sounded hollow. "You knew Pearl belonged to that hedge fund manager in Singapore who went bankrupt. You came back to me because you needed someone to pay for your penthouses, your private tutors, and your designer bags. And I." He looked around the empty, cavernous house, his eyes welling with burning tears. "I gave up my own flesh and blood for a leech." Charlotte attempted to scream, attempted to play the victim, attempted to throw a glass against the wall, but Alexander didn't even blink. He called the estate security team, had them pack her designer luggage into garbage bags, and had both Charlotte and Pearl escorted past the security gates into the pouring rain. That night, Alexander sat alone on the floor of Kimmy's empty bedroom. He held the empty crystal jar in his lap, clutching it against his chest like a dying man clinging to his last breath, weeping until the morning sun filled the room. 2 years passed. Time does not stop for grief, nor does it wait for regret. By the time Kimberly turned 8, the memories of the city we had left behind felt like a dream from a previous lifetime. Kimmy had grown taller. Her hair, which I had once braided so tightly to keep her out of trouble, now fell in soft, loose waves around her shoulders. She played the cello in the youth orchestra, loved vanilla scones with clotted cream, and had developed a charming Scottish lilt that made me smile every time she spoke. I had re-established my design firm, opening a small studio near the Royal Mile that specialized in historical restoration. We were content. We were whole. It was an unseasonably warm afternoon in May when the past finally caught up with us. I had driven to the primary school to pick Kimmy up after her orchestra rehearsal. I was standing near the stone archway of the school garden, chatting with another parent, when I felt a sudden, unnatural chill prickle the back of my neck. I turned around. Standing across the narrow cobblestone street, half hidden behind an old sycamore tree, was a man. He was wearing a dark trench coat that looked far too large for his frame. His face was gaunt, his cheekbones protruding sharply beneath pale, papery skin, and his hair, once impeccably styled and jet black, was streaked with gray at the temples. It took me 3 full seconds to recognize Alexander Morrison. He looked like a ghost that had wandered out of a tomb. His hands were stuffed deep into his pockets, trembling visibly, his eyes fixed on the school gates with a desperation so intense it was almost frightening. When the school doors opened and the children poured out into the courtyard, Alexander took a frantic step forward, stumbling slightly on the curb. Kimmy walked out carrying her cello case on her back, laughing alongside 2 of her classmates. She wore a dark green school blazer with an embroidered crest, her cheeks flushed with the warmth of the spring afternoon. Alexander stopped breathing. A ragged, strangled sound escaped his throat. "Kimmy?" he whispered. He broke into a hurried, clumsy run across the street, ignoring the blare of a passing taxi's horn. He reached the gate just as Kimmy stepped onto the pavement. "Kimmy?" Alexander cried out, his voice cracking violently. He dropped to his knees right there on the wet stone, completely oblivious to the parents and teachers staring at him in shock. "Kimmy, my baby, it's Daddy. Daddy found you." The entire courtyard went quiet. I moved immediately, stepping between Alexander and my daughter, my hands ready to pull her behind me. But Kimmy didn't hide. She stopped walking. She adjusted the strap of her cello case on her shoulder and looked down at the man kneeling in the dirt before her. There was no terror in her eyes. There was no hatred. There was no sudden rush of tears, no trembling lip, no sign of the little girl who had once knelt on a doorstep shouting Uncle Alex 3,000 times until her vocal cords bled. There was only a vast, impassable ocean of indifference. Alexander reached out with a shaking hand, pulling a brand new, velvet-lined box from his coat pocket. He opened it with trembling fingers, revealing hundreds of meticulously hand-cut green tickets. "Look, Kimmy." Alexander wept openly, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks, dropping onto the cobblestones. "Look what Daddy brought you. 1,000 coupons. 10,000 coupons. You can tear them all up. You can make Daddy do anything. I'll sell the company, I'll move to this city, I'll buy a house on this street. I'll never leave you again. Just give Daddy one chance. Just one." Kimmy looked at the velvet box. She looked at the green paper that had once been the currency of her childhood dignity. Then, she looked up at his face. "Mister," Kimmy said, her voice clear, calm, and perfectly steady in the crisp Scottish air. "You shouldn't waste your paper." Alexander's breath hitched in his throat. His blood seemed to freeze in his veins. "Mister?"
Kimmy, no.
"It's Daddy. Look at me, please look at Daddy." "My dad died when I was 6, Kimmy said politely, tilting her head with the innocent candor that only a child possesses. "And Uncle Alex went home to take care of Pearl." She reached out, gently took my hand in hers, and looked up at me with a soft, sunny smile. "Mom, can we get ice cream on the way home? Professor McLeod said I played the Bach suite really well today." I looked down at my daughter, my heart swelling with an emotion so fierce and pure it eclipsed every painful memory I had ever carried. "Of course we can, sweetheart," I said softly. I never looked down at Alexander Morrison. I didn't utter a single word of reproach, didn't offer a single glance of triumph or malice. To hate him would have meant he still mattered. To ignore him was to confirm he was nothing. I turned with my daughter, our hands clasped tightly together, and walked toward our car parked down the lane. Behind us, in the middle of the crowded school gate, beneath the gentle afternoon sun, the powerful, untouchable Alexander Morrison remained on his knees in the dirt. He clutched his 1,000 useless coupons to his chest, weeping like a broken child whose cries would never, ever be answered again.